The first crisp breeze of October had arrived. It carried the smell of burning leaves and cinnamon, floating through the cracked window of the tiny kitchen where Evelyn stood, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black tea. Outside, golden leaves danced across the sidewalk like children at play. But inside, the silence was thick, swollen with words unspoken. Scarlett was coming to visit. Not the Scarlett of childhood, the little girl who once begged to be pushed higher on the playground swings, who tucked her fingers in Evelyn's worn coat pockets on their way home from the library. This was 35-year-old Scarlett. Fierce, accomplished, wounded, and angry. Evelyn had felt the shift weeks ago, when Scarlett had shown up at her doorstep with an article, a carefully researched exposé about a hidden financier behind a network of philanthropic funds. The name Evelyn Sinclair had been buried in the appendix, one line, discreet. But Scarlett had recognized her mother's handwriting in the old foundation documents. The truth had begun to leak. The facade of Miss Evelyn, the humble retired teacher with a modest pension and a second-hand car, had cracked. Scarlett had come seeking answers. The kettle whistled just as the door creaked open. Scarlett stepped inside, her heels echoing across the wooden floor like punctuation in a sentence too long held in. She didn't speak at first, just looked around the kitchen, the same yellow curtains from her childhood still fluttering slightly, the same flower-shaped magnets on the fridge. Evelyn's voice was soft. "You're early." "I didn't want to think too long," Scarlett replied, setting her bag down. "I thought if I hesitated, I might not come." There was the wait. Evelyn pulled out a chair. "I made your favorite," she said, nodding to the apple pie cooling on the stove. "Still use your grandmother's recipe." Scarlett didn't sit. Instead, she wandered the kitchen like a museum patron, touching a chipped plate, a faded photo on the wall of her 5th birthday party, Evelyn holding her close, cake on both their noses. "When were you going to tell me?" Scarlett finally asked. Evelyn's hands trembled, but she kept them steady against the mug. "I almost did. 100 times. Graduation night. The day you got your first job. On your wedding day." "Then why didn't you?" Scarlett's voice cracked, barely, but it cracked. "Because," Evelyn whispered, "you were safe. You were loved. And because the truth would have meant taking you into a war you couldn't choose." Scarlett turned. "A war?" Evelyn nodded, eyes glassy. "Your father's family never wanted me to raise you. They thought money bought morality. I had to disappear to keep you mine." "I grew up thinking we were poor," Scarlett said, barely a whisper. "You let me think you were struggling. You let me pay your rent once. I needed you to grow strong. To learn empathy. To believe in effort, not inheritance. I couldn't let you become them." The words hung between them like fog. Scarlett finally sat. The silence now was not cold, but full. "Do you remember the autumn you were 8? Evelyn asked suddenly. "When the heater broke?" Scarlett's brow furrowed, then slowly smoothed. "You brought all the blankets into the living room. We slept in a tent made of chairs and quilts." Evelyn smiled, fragile. "And I told you it was an adventure. That we were explorers camping on the moon. You made powdered hot chocolate with tap water and sang lullabies in Spanish," Scarlett added. "We were freezing," Evelyn chuckled. "But you were so happy." Scarlett was quiet. "Then, I thought that was magic." "It was," Evelyn said gently. "It was the magic of a mother doing the best she could with what she had." Scarlett looked up. "But you had more. You had everything." "I had money," Evelyn corrected. "But I didn't have the freedom to show it. If I had, you might have grown up in marble hallways, yes, but you also might have lost me." Scarlett's throat tightened. "You don't know that." "No," Evelyn admitted, "but I was willing to pay any price to be your mother." They sat in silence again. But this time, it was a different kind. A softer kind. Outside, the sun filtered through amber leaves, casting a golden glow through the window. Evelyn reached into the drawer and pulled out a photo, one Scarlett had never seen. It showed Evelyn, decades younger, standing in front of a boardroom window in a black tailored suit. Powerful. Distant. The real Evelyn. The one hidden for 35 years. Scarlett took the photo in both hands. "This was you." Evelyn nodded. Scarlett looked between the photo and the woman before her, now older, smaller, more weathered, but no less formidable. You could have ruled the world, Scarlett murmured. I chose to raise mine instead, Evelyn said. And now, if you'll let me, I'd like to show you everything. Scarlett looked at her mother again. For the first time, she saw all of her. The fighter, the protector, the woman who built an empire, then buried it to protect her child. She stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around Evelyn's shoulders. The first embrace in years that didn't feel like holding a stranger. I'm ready, Scarlett whispered. And in the kitchen where powdered cocoa once tasted like moonlight, the truth finally felt like home. It had been 2 years. 730 days. Long enough for spring to come and go twice. Long enough for regret to become a companion Evelyn no longer tried to shake. The envelope had arrived without warning. Heavy cardstock, hand-addressed. Scarlett's handwriting, unmistakable, even after all this time. Please come. Saturday, 7 p.m. The Carlisle. No apology. No explanation. Just an invitation. A single door cracked open after years of silence. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror as thunder rumbled in the distance. She smoothed the sleeves of her charcoal gray coat, pulled her hair into the soft, elegant bun she'd worn since she was 30, and slid her feet into simple black pumps. Bernard, her longtime driver, waited by the garage. The Bentley was already humming softly, warm and dry inside. But Evelyn raised one hand. I'm walking tonight, she said gently. I need to feel the rain. Bernard opened his mouth to object, then paused. He had seen that look before, quiet, steel-willed, unshakable. The look she wore when she sold off properties to fund a scholarship program in secret. The same look she wore when Scarlett was born. Yes, ma'am, he replied, stepping aside. The sky wept without mercy. Rain fell in long silver strands, soaking Evelyn's coat within moments. She walked slowly, deliberately, each step a prayer of penance, each drop a memory clinging to her skin. She didn't rush. The Carlisle was only 8 blocks away. With each step, her mind wandered back through the years. To the baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. To scraped knees and science fairs. To whispered bedtime stories and college acceptance letters. To the last conversation, sharp, final, echoing with disappointment. And then, silence. Now, 2 years later, she was walking into a world she no longer recognized, her daughter's world. The ballroom at the Carlisle shimmered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers. Velvet drapes. Tables dressed in ivory linens. Scarlett was radiant, tall, composed, her smile practiced, her posture impeccable. She looked every inch the rising star of the city's non-profit elite. When Evelyn arrived, no one turned. She slipped inside quietly, raindrops still glistening on her coat. Scarlett noticed eventually. Her smile faltered just a fraction before she crossed the room. You came, she said, her voice soft, unsure. I did, Evelyn replied. Thank you for inviting me. Scarlett hesitated, then leaned in to press a polite kiss to her mother's cheek. It felt like a formality, not affection. Then, with one arm gently guiding her mother's elbow, Scarlett led her into the circle of guests. This is Evelyn, Scarlett announced, her voice light and polished. My mother. She's a retired schoolteacher. Evelyn offered a hand. Lovely to meet you all. The reactions were subtle, a flicker of polite surprise, a slow blink, the too smooth shift to small talk. Someone commented on the noble simplicity of teaching. Another asked if she'd found retirement too quiet. One man, silver-haired, cufflinks gleaming, smiled kindly and said, Must be proud of how far Scarlett's come. Evelyn smiled too, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. They didn't know who she was. And Scarlett hadn't corrected them. It was near the dessert hour when Evelyn wandered, unnoticed, toward the garden terrace just off the side hall. She needed air. Needed space from the clinking glasses and curated laughter. And that's when she heard it. Scarlett's voice. Floating through the half-open French doors. She means well, Scarlett was saying to a trio of friends. But she's always been quaint. A bit rigid. Very old school. You know the type. Laughter. Light, harmless. Someone asked if Evelyn was staying long. She won't. It's not really her world. She doesn't belong here. Another chuckle. And then, silence, thick like fog. Evelyn turned away before they could see her. She stepped out into the rain again, barely noticing it now. Her gift, a small box, simply wrapped, tied with a ribbon, remained unopened on the table behind her. She hadn't even had the chance to explain it. A pendant. A rare blue diamond, set into a delicate gold chain. Meant to be passed from mother to daughter. She had carried it for years. Now it stayed behind. She walked through the rain like a ghost. The city blurred around her, lights smeared by the downpour, her breath rising in small clouds against the cold. She thought she had steeled herself for this. But nothing had prepared her for hearing her daughter, her once inseparable girl, draw a quiet line between them. Quaint. Doesn't belong. She won't stay. Each word replayed like a whisper turned blade. By the time she reached her brownstone, she was soaked through. Her coat clung to her like regret. Her hair stuck to her cheeks in damp wisps. Water trailed down her spine like fingers tracing old wounds. Bernard opened the door without a word. He took her coat, handed her a warm towel. Hot tea? He asked gently. Evelyn nodded, her voice lost somewhere in the hollow of her chest. She sat at the window, fingers curled around a porcelain cup, watching the streetlights flicker through the mist. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to weep. Not out of bitterness. Not even out of grief. But for the ache of being almost seen and still remaining invisible. In the quiet, a resolve began to form. Not sharp, not cold, but quiet and strong. Scarlett didn't know, not truly, who her mother was. Not yet. But one day she would. And Evelyn would not need a ballroom, or applause, or introduction. She would simply show her. With presence. With truth. One step, one rain-washed step, at a time. The gates whispered open. Silent, smooth, like they had done 1,000 times before, but this time, they weren't just opening to let Evelyn in. They were opening to let something out. Truth. Memory. A life that had been carefully folded away for 35 years. Evelyn stepped out of the Bentley and onto the gravel driveway of her own estate. The rain had dried. But her coat was still damp from the earlier walk. A walk that had begun in hope and ended in silence. She didn't look back. The house, a sprawling Georgian-style mansion of stone and glass, stood like a cathedral of secrets at the edge of the hill. Each window lit with a warm golden glow. Each step on the flagstone path echoing with restraint. Inside, the staff greeted her with gentle nods. No one asked about the evening. No one mentioned the unopened gift or the way Evelyn had returned without it. They knew better. In the study, a fire crackled. Evelyn poured herself a single measure of scotch, neat, and sat down by the hearth. She didn't cry. Not now. Not after all these years of holding a world together with little more than silence and steel. Her fingers grazed the velvet box still tucked in her coat pocket. The pendant was still inside. She hadn't given it to Scarlett. Couldn't. Not when the distance between them was no longer measured in miles, but in perception. Outside, the wind shifted. And Evelyn knew, without looking at her phone, that Scarlett would be searching. The call came at midnight. It wasn't Scarlett. It was Harrison Blackwell, her longtime attorney and reluctant co-conspirator. Evelyn, he said without preamble, we need to talk. I assumed we would, she replied softly. You've been operating under this facade for too long. The trust funds. The holdings. The patents. Someone's going to dig eventually, especially now that Scarlett's friends are curious. He paused. She came to see me, Evelyn. Evelyn's breath caught. Did you tell her? No. I wouldn't. That's not my place. But I think she suspects something. She asked too many questions and she's smart. Evelyn closed her eyes. She's more than smart, she whispered. She's relentless. Just like me. The knock came 3 days later. Late afternoon. Soft sunlight spilled over the front steps, lighting up the hydrangeas and the carved oak doors that had remained closed to the world for decades. Evelyn had expected it. She stood in the grand hallway, watching through the upstairs window as Scarlett stepped out of a rideshare and approached the gate. There was no hesitance in her walk. No anger. Just determination. Scarlett pressed the call button once. Evelyn didn't move. Didn't answer. The speaker crackled. I know you're in there. Silence. I went by Harrison's office. He wouldn't tell me anything. But he didn't have to. The way he didn't speak said everything. The pause. I need to know the truth. Not for drama. Not for some grand reveal. I just need to know who you are. Another pause. And who I've been loving all these years. That broke Evelyn. Not the logic. Not the persistence. But the ache in her daughter's voice. The child beneath the woman. She pressed a button. The gates slid open. Scarlett stepped through the foyer with wide eyes and cautious steps. This is where you live, she whispered. Evelyn nodded. No penthouse. No secret hideaway. Just this. Scarlett turned slowly, taking it in. The sweeping staircase, the vaulted ceilings, the art on the walls that looked vaguely familiar from textbooks. That's an original Rothko, Scarlett murmured, pointing at a piece in the hallway. Yes, Evelyn said. Bought it before anyone knew his name. She led Scarlett down the corridor. Into the library. Past the drawing room. Into the sunroom, where afternoon light filtered through glass walls into lush green ferns. This was your home? Scarlett asked again, softer now. Evelyn nodded. But I chose not to let it be yours. Scarlett turned, eyes glinting with disbelief and hurt. Why? And Evelyn finally told her. I married into power, she began, and when that power tried to destroy me, I fought back. But I knew I couldn't win through courts or money. They had more of both. She paused, fingers grazing the armrest of the chair like it anchored her to now. So I disappeared. Legally, I remained Patricia Evelyn Wakefield. But publicly, I became Evelyn Grant. A schoolteacher, modest, humble, invisible. It was the only way the courts would believe I had no interest in wealth. That I could provide a normal life. For me, Scarlett whispered. Just for you. I gave up everything visible so I could keep the one thing that mattered, being your mother. Scarlett looked down. I remember peanut butter sandwiches. Second-hand clothes. Coupons. I thought we were poor, Evelyn said gently. And we were, in a way. Not in assets, but in access. She stood, walking to the tall windows. Beyond the garden walls lay Scarlett's neighborhood. Only a few blocks away. I bought the house next to yours 5 years ago. Just to be near you. Even when you didn't know who I was anymore. Tears slid down Scarlett's face. You watched me, she said, voice breaking. All these years, and you watched me grow, struggle, succeed, and you didn't say anything? I thought I was protecting you. From what? From the corruption that consumed your father. From the weight of expectation. From people who love wealth more than worth. Scarlett stared at her. And from the truth. Evelyn hesitated. Yes, she said finally. But I was wrong. They sat together for a long while in silence. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across marble floors. Finally, Scarlett spoke. I'm angry. You should be. I feel stupid. You're not. I don't know how to feel. You don't have to, Evelyn said, reaching for her daughter's hand. Not tonight. Tonight, just be here. With me. In the truth. Scarlett didn't pull away. And in the stillness, something shifted. The mask had cracked. And underneath wasn't shame, or scandal, or strategy, but a mother who had loved too hard and lied too long. Scarlett rested her head against Evelyn's shoulder. And for the first time in years, they both allowed themselves to just be together, unmasked. The air between them was sharp, not from cold, but from the weight of too many truths spoken too late. Scarlett stood in the middle of the study, the same study where just a week earlier she had rested her head on Evelyn's shoulder, comforted by revelations she wasn't ready for, but tried to embrace. But now, her arms were crossed. Her eyes glistened, not from tears this time, but something deeper. Fracture. Evelyn remained near the window, framed in gold light, though none of it seemed to touch her. She looked smaller than usual, not from age, but from ache. "You lied to me," Scarlett said again, slower this time, as if saying it out loud might finally make sense of it all. "I didn't lie," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I withheld." Scarlett's laugh was bitter, hollow. "That's the line you're going with? Withheld? You didn't withhold a bedtime story or a second scoop of ice cream, Mom. You withheld my entire life. My identity." Evelyn stepped forward, hands open but not reaching. "I didn't want you to grow up like them. The Morrisons. Counting worth by zip code and bloodline. That world, it swallows people. I wanted to protect you from that." "By pretending we were poor? By making me think you were struggling to pay for school lunch while you were sitting on millions?" Evelyn flinched. "Yes." Scarlett's voice cracked. "You let me feel guilty for every Christmas gift I asked for. You told me I had to earn things because money doesn't grow on trees, when it was growing in your investment portfolios." She paused, trembling. "Did you enjoy watching me struggle?" The silence that followed was too long, too brutal. Evelyn's lips parted, but she said nothing, and that was worse than any answer. "I used to think you were a miracle," Scarlett said, her voice now distant. "You did so much with so little. You taught me to be kind, to give even when we had nothing. That strength? That humility? I worshiped that." Tears sprang to her eyes, but she didn't wipe them. She let them fall like proof. "But now I know it was all performance. A curated version of you. Like a stage play, with thrift store props and good intentions." "It was never fake," Evelyn said, stepping forward again. "I loved you. Every day. I still do." Scarlett shook her head. "You loved the idea of protecting me, of crafting some perfect morality tale where I grow up grateful and grounded and never know the cost." Her voice dropped. "But what you took from me wasn't just the truth." Evelyn stared at her, eyes wide. Scarlett took a breath that sounded almost like a sob. "You took away my choice. My chance to decide who I wanted to be, knowing the whole story." Evelyn's hand went to her chest, an involuntary response to pain that wasn't physical. "I was afraid," she whispered. Scarlett nodded slowly. "So was I. Every time we didn't have enough, every time I saw you cry over bills, I carried that. I inhaled that fear. It shaped me." She paused. "And it wasn't even real." They stood in silence, just breathing. The chandelier above flickered slightly, not from any power surge, but from the tension in the room, thick enough to distort light. "I understand what you wanted," Scarlett said finally, softer now. "I even understand why you did it." She looked at her mother, really looked. "But understanding doesn't mean forgiveness." Evelyn nodded once. A quiet, restrained gesture of surrender. "I don't expect forgiveness. Not now. Maybe not ever." Scarlett turned toward the door. "I need space. I know. I don't know when, or if I'll be ready to talk again." "I know," Evelyn said again, voice steady, though her hands trembled. Scarlett walked to the threshold, then paused. She didn't turn back. "When I was little, I thought you were magic," she said quietly. "Now, I think you're just human." And with that, she walked out. The front door closed with the softest of clicks. Not a slam. Not a bang. Just a quiet, devastating punctuation. Evelyn stood alone. The house around her, vast, expensive, immaculately curated, felt suddenly cavernous. She returned to the study and sat back down in the same chair, across from the one her daughter had just left. Her tea had gone cold, but she drank it anyway. The bitterness suited her. She looked at the gift box on the table, unopened, untouched. Inside was a letter she had written to Scarlett years ago but never sent. She had planned to give it tonight. She reached for it now, and put it away. Not yet. The sky outside turned violet as evening settled in. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes sounded, the same ones Evelyn had installed when Scarlett was 12 and going through her first heartbreak. They sounded softer now. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn, the woman who had once built an empire in silence, felt utterly And undeniably, alone. Not because she lacked people, but because she had finally told the truth. And in doing so, had lost the one person she told it for. For the first time in 35 years, Evelyn Martin didn't walk through the back door. She walked through the front, shoulders straight, chin lifted, heart pounding like a child's first recital. The glass doors of Ardent and Company parted with a soft whisper, but her presence shouted louder than any trumpet ever could. She was no longer Patricia the assistant or Pat the consultant. She was Evelyn Martin, founder, architect, and soul of the empire. And she was done hiding. Employees paused mid-stride. Some gasped quietly. A few dropped their coffee lids. But no one spoke. Until Julian, the CFO, approached, hesitant, almost reverent. "Ms. Martin, you're here?" "I am," she said softly, and with a small, almost tender smile. "It's time." Hours passed in a blur of boardroom meetings, asset reviews, and long overdue introductions. Evelyn answered every question. She signed what needed to be signed. And she offered something rarer than capital or vision, truth. When the final document was reviewed and filed, she stepped out into the fading daylight, lighter than she had felt in years. That was when she saw him, Marcus, standing by the valet at the front of the building, too engrossed in his phone to notice her at first. Evelyn considered walking past. But then his gaze flicked up, and recognition hit them both. "Mrs. Martin," he said stiffly. "It's Evelyn now," she replied with gentle resolve. "No more masks." He hesitated. Then quietly, "She's staying at the St. Regis." Evelyn blinked. "Scarlett." He nodded. "I'm not proud of how things ended between us. But I thought, maybe you'd want to know." Evelyn placed a hand over her chest, not out of formality, but to still the storm rising inside. She whispered, "Thank you," and turned toward the street. She didn't send a car. Didn't call ahead. She walked. Past the blinking storefronts, the polished sidewalks, the curious glances. Past the life she'd curated behind closed doors. By the time she reached the St. Regis, the sun had dipped low, casting amber hues across the entrance. She stood before the elevator, watching the numbers light up one by one. Each ding felt like a heartbeat. Scarlett opened the door in a silk robe, mascara slightly smudged, hair tied up carelessly. She froze. "Mom, can I come in?" Evelyn asked, voice steady but soft. Scarlett didn't answer. She simply stepped aside. The room smelled like lavender and room service. A tray of untouched salads sat on the table. The TV buzzed low in the background, playing a documentary no one was watching. They sat, one on the armchair, one on the edge of the bed. Silence filled the room. Then Evelyn broke it, not with a confession, but a beginning. "I should have told you everything years ago. When you turned 18. Or 25. Or after your divorce. So many moments I could have chosen truth." Scarlett stared down at her hands. "I was a coward," Evelyn continued. "I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is I was protecting me from your disappointment. Your rejection. I couldn't bear losing you." Scarlett exhaled, long and shaky. "You still lost me," she said, not cruelly, just fact. Evelyn nodded. "I did." The pause that followed was heavier than grief. "I hated you," Scarlett whispered. "Not just for the lie, but for how good you were at it." Evelyn looked down, eyes wet. "I hated myself too." Scarlett stood and walked to the window, arms crossed tightly. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said. "I grew up believing we were barely making ends meet. I thought I was resilient because of it, that I understood humility, hard work. But I don't know what parts of me are real." Evelyn rose slowly and stood behind her, not too close. "You are all of it," she said. "You are the girl who studied by flashlight when we couldn't afford the electric bill. You are the woman who still tips waiters generously even when she's upset. You are my daughter, Scarlett. Not because of where you came from, but because of who you chose to become, even in the absence of full truth." Scarlett turned around, eyes filled with something Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Longing. "But you robbed me of choice," Scarlett said again, this time softer. "That's what still hurts." I know. I don't know if I can forgive you. I'm not asking for that, Evelyn said. I'm asking for a beginning. One built on truth, however messy, however late. They stood in that quiet room, the city outside humming in distant rhythm. Then, slowly, Scarlett stepped forward. She didn't hug her mother. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Start with the truth. From the beginning. Who are you?" And Evelyn smiled, this time not with pride or relief, but with honesty. "I'm Evelyn Grace Martin, founder of Ardent, daughter of a factory seamstress, mother to a brilliant woman named Scarlett, and a damn fool for waiting this long to say any of it." Scarlett's lips quivered. Then she laughed. It wasn't bitter. It was tired, tear-soaked, hopeful. The hours passed. They talked, really talked, about secrets, guilt, dreams, legacy. About love that wasn't perfect, but persistent. About beginnings that came not from weddings or births, but from truth. And as dawn began painting light across the hotel window, Evelyn touched her daughter's hand for the first time without fear. Scarlett didn't pull away. She didn't say, "I forgive you." But she whispered, "Let's try again." And for Evelyn, that was enough. Charlotte Graham kept two lives in one body. The world knew her as a retired teacher from Westbridge Elementary, sweet, frugal, kind. But behind dusty curtains in a modest duplex outside of Boston, beneath piles of lesson plans and coupon booklets, was a woman who had once negotiated deals across 3 continents, who still received quarterly reports from shell corporations hidden under names no one would associate with a former public school educator. She watered her potted geraniums in a robe from Macy's clearance rack, while her email pinged with balance sheets from holding companies managing over $600 million in assets. But all of that, all of her, was hidden from her daughter. Ava had always believed they were poor. Not food stamp poor, but count every receipt poor. Charlotte had made a religion out of just enough. When Ava needed braces, they skipped vacation. When she got into Dartmouth, Charlotte cried through the financial aid paperwork like it was a confessional. Ava learned to admire her mother for her sacrifices, even as she secretly resented the weight of lack. She became a financial analyst by 25, VP by 31, driving a Mercedes her mother never asked to ride in, wearing suits that cost more than their monthly rent back then. And still, Charlotte sent birthday cards with $20 treat yourself scribbled at the bottom. One Sunday in late fall, Ava visited her mother's home after nearly a year. It smelled like lemon polish and quiet regrets. They sat at the same kitchen table that had endured decades of soup cans and utility bills. "I'm thinking of buying a condo in Tribeca," Ava said over tea. Charlotte nodded, stirring honey into her cup. "I hope it has good windows. You always liked natural light." It was the kind of response Ava hated. Polite, vague. Ava set her cup down. "Mom, why do you act like money doesn't matter? You've struggled your whole life. I just don't understand how you're still okay living like this." Charlotte looked out the window at the maple tree shedding gold onto the sidewalk. "I didn't struggle, sweetheart," she said quietly. "I chose this." That night, Charlotte lay awake longer than she had in years. She was getting older. The companies were getting too complex for her to steer from the shadows. The lawyers had started pushing harder. "You need to formalize your estate, Charlotte. We can't hide your name forever." Ava deserved the truth. But how do you tell someone that the story of their life, the very identity they believed they forged through grit, was partially based on a lie? A week later, Charlotte invited Ava back. "No reason," she said on the phone. "I thought maybe you'd want to see something." When Ava arrived, the air smelled different. Gone was the lemon polish. In its place, faint sandalwood and fresh paint. Charlotte led her to the guest bedroom, once a storage space, and opened a door Ava had never noticed before. It led to a staircase. Then a narrow hallway. And finally, a private study hidden in the back of the house. It looked nothing like the rest of the home. Mahogany walls. Oil paintings. A marble bust of someone Ava vaguely recognized from a business journal. On the desk were stacks of papers. Portfolios. Legal documents. Letters with Charlotte Graham in embossed print above a logo Ava had only seen in high finance circles. Ava's breath caught. "What is this?" Charlotte took a breath that seemed to echo off the walls. "This is the part of me I never showed you." For the next hour, Ava stood frozen while her mother explained. The trust funds. The offshore accounts. The patent that seeded the whole empire back in 1994. "But the coupons," Ava whispered. Charlotte smiled sadly. "Those were real. So was the soup. But not because I couldn't afford more. Because I didn't want you to grow up like your father. I wanted you to have hunger. For values that money can't teach." Ava stepped back. "You let me think you were poor." "I let you believe I was simple," Charlotte corrected. "Because sometimes being underestimated is the best armor. You had a clean slate. A fire that was your own. I had peace." Ava sank into the leather armchair by the fireplace. The silence was too loud. All the years she'd felt shame, the embarrassment at school dances, the panic when she had to explain her frugal mother to boyfriends, the moments she hated Charlotte for making her feel like she had to earn everything. None of it had been what it seemed. "I thought you were weak," Ava said, eyes distant. "I know," Charlotte answered. "And I let you." The hours passed quietly. They didn't argue. They didn't scream. There was no explosion of emotion, just the slow exhale of a truth too long held. Ava walked through the study, fingered the spine of a leather-bound ledger, glanced at the photograph of her mother shaking hands with a tech CEO Ava once idolized. "You've built something extraordinary." Charlotte stood beside her now. "So have you." Later that evening, they sat in the kitchen again. 2 cups of tea. No honey this time. "I'm not mad," Ava finally said. "But I don't know how to feel yet." "You don't have to," Charlotte replied. "I just need you to know me. Really know me. Before time runs out." A long pause. Then Ava reached across the table, held her mother's hand. Her voice was soft, but her grip was firm. "Then let's stop pretending." The rain had stopped hours ago, but the sky still wore its grief like a worn shawl. Gray, heavy, reluctant to let go. Ava walked into the cafe with a kind of practiced poise she had sharpened over the years. Heels clicking on the marble floor, bag pressed tight under her arm. Charlotte was already there. She always arrived early. Her cardigan was neat, her lipstick a muted plum. She looked like the version of herself Ava remembered, not the one she had just read about. The article had landed on Ava's desk that morning. A Forbes feature, barely 800 words, but enough to break everything. There was Charlotte Graham, founder, funder, and silent force behind over a dozen top-tier investment firms. A woman Ava had believed could barely afford new shoes. Ava sat down across from her, eyes unreadable. There were no pleasantries. Just the clink of her spoon in a half-stirred cappuccino. "You let me grow up believing we had nothing," she said. Charlotte's hand stayed wrapped around her teacup. But Ava noticed the faint tremble in her thumb. "I let you believe we had enough," Charlotte replied softly. "That's not the same thing," Ava hissed. "Do you even understand what that did to me?" Her voice cracked, fury and heartbreak colliding mid-sentence. "I worked 3 jobs in college. I skipped meals so I could save money to buy you Christmas gifts. You told me we couldn't afford eggs some weeks, Mom." Charlotte blinked slowly. "And you still turned out strong." Ava laughed bitterly. It wasn't funny, but grief often wore the mask of sarcasm. "Was that your grand experiment? To see if your daughter could thrive on struggle while you signed checks behind some shell corporation in the Caymans?" Charlotte didn't flinch. "No, it wasn't an experiment. It was a choice. One I made every single day. Not because I didn't want you to have more, but because I didn't want you to become less." The silence between them stretched long. Ava picked at the corner of her napkin. "I thought you were brave for scraping by. I thought you were noble. I felt guilty when I started making more than you. And the whole time, you were, what? Playing pretend?" "I was protecting you," Charlotte said quietly. "From what?" "Me. From them." Her voice cracked for the first time. "From your father's world. From a life of private jets and private schools and private griefs no one talks about. You don't remember how power poisons when it's handed too easily. I do. Ava looked away. I didn't need a trust fund, she muttered. I just needed the truth. Charlotte reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. It had Ava's name on it, in handwriting Ava hadn't seen since she was 10. I wrote this for your high school graduation, then again for college, then for your wedding. Each time I meant to give it to you. Each time I lost the nerve. Ava didn't touch the envelope. Her hands were clenched now, pressed against the table like she was holding herself down. Why did you wait? Charlotte looked at her daughter as if she was trying to memorize her face. Because love made me cowardly. I thought the longer I waited, the more I was protecting you. But maybe I was protecting myself from the day you'd look at me the way you're looking at me now. Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm still your mother, Charlotte said, her voice breaking. And I still love you the same way I always did. Quietly, completely, and yes, imperfectly. She hesitated. Every apartment application you filled that mysteriously got approved? I was there. Every promotion you got when the odds weren't in your favor? I whispered in ears you didn't know were listening. You earned everything, Ava. But I made sure no one took it from you. Ava stared. Tears welled but didn't fall. That wasn't your call to make. No, Charlotte whispered. It wasn't. But I made it anyway. The server came to refill their water. Neither spoke. The sound of the pitcher pouring into Ava's glass was louder than thunder. Finally, Ava reached across the table. Not to hold her mother's hand, but to slide the envelope closer. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she didn't push it away either. Charlotte took that as a small mercy. I don't know how to forgive you, Ava said. Charlotte nodded. I don't need you to. Not now. Maybe not ever. I just need you to see the whole of me. Even the messy, controlling, scared parts. Ava let out a breath that felt like the release of 1,000 locked doors. I don't hate you, she said finally. That's something, Charlotte whispered. They finished their drinks in silence. Then Ava stood. She didn't hug her mother. Didn't cry. Didn't promise anything. But before she left, she turned at the door and said, If we start over? No more secrets. Charlotte nodded once. Tears now sliding freely, but without shame. No more secrets. Truth, finally spoken, didn't erase the wounds. But it began the healing. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step back. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. It was a Friday morning, the kind that carried the promise of warmth but hadn't quite decided to deliver it. The air was crisp, and the sky sat in a delicate haze. Like it, too, was holding its breath. Ava stepped out of the black car, onto the quiet cul-de-sac lined with manicured hedges and whispering trees. At the end of the curved drive stood a house she'd never known. White stone, tall arched windows, a slate roof dusted with early spring petals. It was beautiful, and it was her mother's. Not a rental, not a cover. The door opened before she could knock. Miss Graham, Bernard said with a warm nod. He was older than she remembered, but his posture was still soldier straight, his eyes kind beneath wire-rimmed glasses. I guess we've met before, Ava managed, voice uncertain. Bernard smiled, not unkindly. More than you know. Inside, the house felt like a living memoir. Books lined shelves like old friends. Paintings adorned the walls, some Ava recognized from galleries, others from childhood drawings now framed in gold. The scent of lemon polish and fresh coffee floated through the air. Charlotte was waiting in the sunroom, hands folded neatly, eyes searching her daughter's face with careful hope. Ava didn't hug her, but she sat down. That was enough for now. I want to know, Ava said softly. Everything. Charlotte nodded once, and for the next 3 days she opened the doors, both literal and metaphorical. They began with the study. On one wall, framed newspaper clippings, headlines, philanthropic awards, photos of board meetings where Charlotte stood not at the center, but just behind it, always just out of focus. This is where the decisions are made, Charlotte said. Not boastful. Not apologetic. Just honest. Later that afternoon, they visited a local community center. A modest brick building with bright murals and wide-open hearts. Inside, teenagers painted posters for a campaign to increase college access. One girl with a fierce buzz cut ran up to Charlotte and hugged her without hesitation. "Ms. C, the grant came through," she beamed. "We can start the coding workshops next month." Charlotte grinned like a proud aunt. "Good. And you'll run them?" Ava watched the interaction, watched the way her mother faded into the background. Just enough to let others shine. Not every leader wore power like armor. Some wore it like soil, something in which others could grow. That evening, they walked through the garden. Bernard brought them tea. The flowers whispered between them, lavender, tulips, evening primrose. "I used to think you were afraid of ambition," Ava said finally, breaking the silence. Charlotte didn't look up. "I was afraid of what ambition did to your father. Of what it almost did to me. You hid so much of yourself." Charlotte turned to her. "So you could find yourself first." The next day, they visited a gallery in downtown Boston. It was small but elegant, filled with energy and youth. Maya Chin, the curator, came rushing over, her eyes wide with disbelief and joy. "Ava Graham?" she exclaimed. "I haven't seen you since Brown." Ava blinked. "Maya? You run this place?" Charlotte watched, quietly amused. Ava walked through the gallery slowly. On the walls were raw, vibrant works. Some from young artists who clearly hadn't found their form yet. Others that demanded you stop, and breathe, and feel. "Maya is one of our fellows," Charlotte said. "She received a microgrant through the Female Visionaries Fund." Ava stared. "You helped her?" "I believed in her." Ava looked around the gallery again, this time with different eyes. This wasn't a vanity project. It was an ecosystem of belief. That night, back at the house, Ava sat on the veranda, legs tucked under her. Charlotte joined her with a blanket and 2 mugs of chamomile. "For years," Ava said, "I worked so hard to be successful because I thought we had nothing. I felt guilty every time I moved ahead, like I was leaving you behind." Charlotte's gaze didn't falter. "You were never behind. I was just behind the curtain. But you could have told me." "I should have." Silence again. But this time, it didn't ache. "I think I'm proud," Ava said softly. "Of what?" her mother asked. Ava exhaled. "Not of your wealth. Of your restraint. Of your clarity. Of the fact that you could build all this, and still choose to live a life that made space for others." Charlotte's hand closed around her daughter's. "You've always been my greatest creation," she whispered. Ava leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, just for a moment. The next morning, Bernard found them in the kitchen, laughing, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes that came out more charred than golden. "I suppose," Bernard teased, "the world's most elusive investor has finally let the fire alarm find her." Charlotte grinned. So much for mystique. When Ava left later that afternoon, she paused by the gate. She turned back to the house. The life she was only now beginning to see clearly. She didn't have all the answers. There were still cracks. Still shadows. But she had something else now. Roots. Truth. And for the first time in her adult life, she knew exactly where she came from. The morning sunlight streamed in through the east-facing windows of the study, illuminating the high ceilings, the wood-paneled walls, and the 2 women seated across from each other at a large table cluttered with folders, half-drunk coffees, and color-coded post-it notes. Ava had been living at the estate for 3 months now. Not as a guest. Not as a child reclaiming her bedroom. But as a partner. An equal. They had formed Catalyst Foundation. A venture not just born from capital, but from conviction. Its mission was simple but radical. To fund and mentor female entrepreneurs who had neither family money nor influential networks. Only grit, vision, and the audacity to try. The first few weeks were filled with friction. Charlotte favored caution. She believed in slow growth, deep roots. Ava wanted acceleration. She knew how fast the world moved, how unforgiving markets could be to second guesses. They argued. A lot. But not like before. This time, it wasn't a clash of misunderstanding. It was the tension of creation. Like tuning a violin. Like sharpening a blade. Every evening, they met for tea in the garden room. Sometimes they talked about applicants and projections. Other times, they talked about Ava's childhood. What was real? What wasn't? What still hurt? Once, Ava confessed, "I used to imagine I'd buy you a house like this one. When I finally made it." Charlotte smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "You kind of did," she whispered. They launched the foundation with little fanfare. Just a quiet website. A few select emails. But word spread. By the second month, they had over 1,200 applications. Ava read them like novels. Highlighting lines, making notes, bringing 3 names to every strategy meeting. Charlotte had a different instinct. She could tell in the curve of a sentence which applicant wasn't just pitching a business, but a movement. Together, they built a portfolio of dreamers. A single mother starting a mobile prenatal care van in rural Iowa. A first-gen college graduate turning textile waste into luxury handbags. A former foster youth teaching coding to girls from her old group home. Each story fueled them. Each success, no matter how small, felt personal. By month 5, Ava's name started surfacing in financial publications. The Graham heiress breaks out. From quiet legacy to loud leadership. Meet Ava Graham, the next generation of philanthrocapitalism. She hated the headlines. Because they weren't about the work. They were about the bloodline. In interviews, reporters would lean forward and say, "So, how does it feel to have the keys to a kingdom handed to you?" And Ava, with practiced calm, would smile. Then came the live interview. A Saturday morning broadcast on a national finance network. Ava wore a navy suit. Hair swept into a soft bun. A delicate gold pin on her lapel, Catalyst logo. The anchor, polished and polite, smiled wide and said, "Some critics claim your success is the result of nepotism. That it's easy to build something when your mother already owns the bricks." There was a pause. Ava didn't flinch. She leaned forward, hands clasped on the table, and said with soft, unwavering resolve, "Yes, my mother opened the door. But I was the one who stepped through. And I built the building." Silence followed. The host blinked. Viewers everywhere held their breath. Charlotte, watching from the sunroom, let a tear slip down her cheek. That moment became a turning point. People stopped asking about the past and started focusing on the present, on the measurable impact, on the businesses flourishing, on the women rising. And in every boardroom Ava walked into, every university hall she spoke at, every startup founder she mentored, she carried Charlotte's legacy in one hand and her own name in the other. One night, after a long day of meetings and press calls, Ava found Charlotte in the kitchen, standing barefoot, sipping wine, humming to a record from the 70s. "You were watching," Ava said. Charlotte raised her glass. "To the builder." Ava joined her, clinking glasses. "You know," she said slowly, "when I was younger, I thought you were hiding from the world." Charlotte smiled. "I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. For you." They stood in silence, the kind that feels earned. Outside, Boston was quiet. The city lights flickered like faraway dreams. And inside, a mother and daughter, once divided by secrets, were now united by something deeper. Shared purpose, earned trust, and a belief that, together, they could build more than a foundation. They could build a future. The snow fell in slow spirals that morning. Boston was hushed under a layer of white, the kind of stillness that made even passing cars seem gentle, as if the city itself had paused to remember something important. Charlotte Graham stood outside a modest red brick building tucked between a church and a playground. No cameras, no press, just the same uneven sidewalk, and the soft echo of children reading through cracked open windows. The Center for Literacy and Belonging. It had been 30 years since she first walked through those doors, carrying nothing but a folded resume, and the need to believe she could still matter, even when the world no longer knew her name. Back then, she'd introduced herself as Ms. Graham, The substitute teacher who stayed even when the contract ended. A woman with no ring, no stories about vacations or husbands or summers in Nantucket. Just books. And children. And the quiet duty of showing up. 2 decades later, the building was still there. Renovated now, with solar panels and murals painted by local artists. Funded, in part, by something she and Ava had only dared to whisper about. Catalyst Foundation. They had started with grants. Then seed capital. Then schools. Then the world had noticed. And Ava. Charlotte blinked into the soft flurry of snow, watching a young girl run toward the door with oversized boots. And a backpack almost too heavy for her frame. She reminded Charlotte of Ava at 8. Always serious, always asking why. The girl paused at the steps and turned. She had dark curls, wide eyes, and a kind of cautious bravery that children of immigrants often carry. As if life had already taught them that belonging must be earned. "Are you here to see the art?" the girl asked. Her voice small but steady. Charlotte smiled, wrapping her wool scarf tighter around her neck. "No, sweetheart. Just passing through." "But you're looking at the building like it's yours," the girl said. Charlotte's smile deepened. "In a way," she whispered. The girl tilted her head. "So who are you?" Charlotte paused. 100 answers flickered through her mind. Philanthropist. Founder. Billionaire in hiding. But none of them fit the moment. Not really. She knelt down so they were eye level. The wind tugged at her coat. But she didn't flinch. "I'm the mother," she said gently, "of a woman who believed in her mother's dream. And made it real." Inside, the reading room smelled of cinnamon and glue sticks. Children's laughter drifted through the halls. And on one wall, above a row of donated laptops, was a photo of Ava, mid-speech at the United Nations. She stood at a podium flanked by diplomats, speaking with her hands, eyes bright, voice caught mid-flight. The caption read, "Ava Graham, champion of ethical capital, daughter of change." Charlotte traced the frame with gloved fingers, her reflection warping slightly in the glass. She didn't cry. She had long since run out of tears. But in the silence of that little hallway, with snow swirling just beyond the window, something loosened in her chest. 2 blocks away, nestled in the heart of Back Bay, the Catalyst Foundation headquarters rose like a promise made of glass and steel. Etched in copper above the front steps was a single quote, barely larger than a sentence. "For the mothers who gave up the truth, to teach their daughters what truth was worth." The sculpture had been Ava's idea. When the building was inaugurated, journalists asked if it was a tribute to Charlotte. Ava had only smiled. "It's not about my mother," she said. "It's about every woman who built something sacred." In silence. That winter, Catalyst had reached a milestone. 200 businesses founded. 93% led by women of color. Thousands lifted out of generational poverty. But beyond the numbers, it was the stories that mattered. One of their earliest recipients, a textile worker from Queens, had just expanded her eco-fashion brand to London. A former teen mom now ran a mobile mental health clinic for survivors of abuse. And a once unhoused artist had installed a public mural in downtown LA, depicting a young girl holding a candle in a storm of corporate skyscrapers. Later that night, Charlotte returned home to the estate. The fireplace glowed in the study. Ava was already there, curled on the couch, reading over the next year's impact report. "I heard you visited the center," Ava said without looking up. "I needed to remember where I started," Charlotte replied. Ava closed the folder. "And did you?" Charlotte sank into the armchair across from her, sipping tea that had long since gone lukewarm. "Yes," she said, "and I saw where you've taken it." The pause. Then softly, "You're more than I ever dreamed." Ava smiled. Not with pride, but with peace. "I had a map," she whispered. "I just didn't know until later. You'd drawn it in pencil." Outside, the snow thickened, wrapping the world in white stillness. Inside, 2 women sat in the warmth, bound not by blood or legacy, but by truth finally shared, and love that no longer had to hide. Not all stories end with apologies. Some end with understanding, with the quiet certainty that the next chapter is written together, brick by brick, word by word, side by side.